Internet, Matt here. Have you ever wanted to use your Google Pixel phone but not use the stock Google Android operating system? Do you wonder what life is like on the wild side not having Google Play services on your phone? Or are you just someone who likes to tweak your phone and do a bunch of interesting things to it on the operating system side? Well, in this 6-month review of GrapheneOS, I will document my experience with GrapheneOS, and I'll show you how it worked for me and all the purposes that I use my phone for. So, without further ado, let's get into this and let us see how good GrapheneOS is for a normal user. So before I end up starting my review the whole way through, I just want to go through a little bit of why I use GrapheneOS. So first of all, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I've completed a master's in the past 6 months. And so it was in May that I finished, so not necessarily 6 months from the publishing of this video, but anyways, during that master's degree, I was studying advertising and how it worked within certain apps on mobile. And the iOS version of Duolingo, Busuu, and Babbel are 3 of the apps that I was doing in the research at that time of my life. And through that research, I learned a lot more about the pervasiveness of ads within all of these apps that we use, and how Google is very bad in its operating system about collecting your information. So that was one of the things I wanted to strive to get away from. And so in getting away from that, I found a few operating systems. So CalyxOS, LineageOS, and GrapheneOS are 3 of the options that I gave myself for getting away from that. And GrapheneOS was the most secure, so that was one of the ones that I most wanted to test. So I chose that one. And one of the things that I have been using for a while throughout all my computers and browsers is AdBlock. So this would be the next evolution of using AdBlock. And it will be a more system-wide approach to AdBlock. So being able to block all of those Google ads at the system level instead of just on a per app basis. And now the second reason for this is the fact that I am more interested in open source projects. To that note, I've been a member of the SoCal Linux Expo for the past few years, and I've been talking to some of these open source people for a while too. And with that has come a lot of conversations with people about privacy and stuff. And so with that privacy, and through the fact that I've talked to people who have also used GrapheneOS, I felt more compelled to do that myself. So after a certain point in my research, I was like, I'm just gonna buy a Pixel now. And so I bought a Pixel 9 and a Pixel 8 to test different operating systems. And at this point now, I'm deep into GrapheneOS and I'm having a good time with it. So it's been partially successful in that regard. And I'll go on further to tell you guys about how it's been more successful in other parts. And the third and final reason is because I wanted to take a bigger step in getting into my digital minimalism philosophy. And so again, throughout my research in my master's degree, I saw myself using my screens and my technology more, and I wanted to do more to make that relationship a little bit better with them and not be so much so addicted to them. So in the time since my review or my research started in 2024, I've quit most of my social media except for YouTube and LinkedIn. And lately Substack because I've been using the social media parts of that a little bit more often. But yeah, the big ones like Twitter, what is it, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, I don't use those anymore. So that's at least a plus of this digital minimalism journey. And in getting GrapheneOS, it would help that because it gives me an opportunity to not be able to use those apps since it by default doesn't have Google Play services in on it. And it's pretty awesome not to have those and not to have the ability to get those apps. So also, before I move on to the next section of this video, I'd like to go into some of the sources that I have looked into. So Techlore, the surveillance report, Louis Rossmann, and The Hated One are 4 of the sources that I used in this research and that I consistently go to and watch on my free time to keep up to date on privacy news and open source news too. So if you guys would like to use any of those, feel free to use any of those in whatever research you're doing about privacy and all of that cool stuff. So just so you guys know, for this next section, the setup of my video, I'm going to be linking the newsletter that I delivered with my written review in this, so you can see the whole thing. But this Google Pixel phone right here I got it for super cheap on eBay, for about half price on eBay, and that was pretty cool. And so that was part 1 of this whole fun journey through GrapheneOS, and part 2 was even more funner, which was taking it into a Chromium-enabled browser in order to download Google or GrapheneOS into the thing. So as you'll see, if you go onto the site, the GrapheneOS site, and type in or click on the install buttons, you'll see that there's a bunch of buttons there to do each of the steps in the install process. So if you follow that, you won't have to use the graphical installer on your computer or do it through a command line interface. And that's a lot easier than doing it through those 2 ways, and you don't have to download anything onto your computer other than the images of the system itself. So that's a plus. So it's a pretty easy process. It should take you no more than half an hour to flash this onto your phone and set the phone up itself. So that's very awesome. So after the setup, your first steps are going to be setting up the phone itself, which I don't take through in the review of it, but you can do that yourself. But once you set it up on your first profile, you'll get a thing with icons. But as you see in my screen, I have a different launcher called O Launcher, which I like better because it's more minimal and I don't get to see icons. And so my 5 most used apps: my phone, my messages, my Signal client, which is a Molly, my web browser, and my podcast app are what I have going first. And on my phone, I have mostly the original apps, the default apps on it, but I do have a few, like this weather app, my tour stuff, my browsers, and some extra stores and Discord on here in order to make my phone more of a utility to me. And so I'm pretty cool with it this way because it makes it more of a utility than the way that other people might use it to do social media and more internet things. I'm comfortable with it that way. And so one of the things that may be a detractor for you guys is that some apps might not work by default on it. So sometimes you have apps like banking apps or other stuff that I'm not necessarily sure about. That I don't play maybe games, maybe some other stuff, but they won't work. And one of the ways to make them work is tap info on this app right here, on any app. That doesn't work, and scroll it down to this exploit protection compatibility mode, and doing that will make your app work and not crash at the start. And so that's a good way of doing that. And on to the next section. So on to my next section, which is going to be open source apps. So I'm using mostly open source apps on this computer, and I think, or on this phone so far. And I think the only non-open source app on this phone is going to be Discord, which is probably proprietary. I have to look into that, but all of the rest of these on this phone, on this profile, are open source. And I do have other profiles for work and a profile for banking on this one that I won't show, but those also contain proprietary apps. One of those being my banking app and the Google and Microsoft authenticators. And mostly these open source apps work fine. I won't go into my messages because messages is the one that gave me a problem at one point in time, but I won't show that. So sometimes the messaging apps won't work quite good, but as far as I know, they do work good at group chat for me, and they also send pictures and videos well. So that's good. And the open source Firefox alternatives are good for privacy for me, for the little interneting that I do on this phone. And Thunderbird Mail is a good client for getting all my mail in one place. And all of these other apps are pretty cool too. So first of all, I've never really used Google phones before, but one thing that you'll notice with this gallery app is that it doesn't have all of the cool features that the Google Gallery app will have. For instance, and the menus are kind of different. And that goes the same way with the Files app and all of the other ones. Actually, to be honest, this looks the same way as the Files app on my other Android devices, so it's most likely the same, but some of these apps are kind of different. And it goes to say that. And also the thing that I don't like about this one is that I have some Turkish music right here that I like to listen to that's instrumentals from Turkish people, like Cenk Erdoğan. Yeah, this is a Cenk Erdoğan music. And the G with the crescent at the top, as you'll see right there, let it focus. Sometimes it doesn't work quite right. And others like the share, the chair, and the I without the dot on top don't always work the best on some of these open source ones. Anadolu Beşlik. Erkan Over is one of the other Turkish people that didn't work. So Anadolu Beşlik got cut off. And yeah, this one doesn't work. So if you're Turkish or use any other alternate character sets, just know that some of these apps won't display it correctly, and you might not always have a correct display of your characters, but other than that, it's good. It's good in my books. And going back to the camera, or actually it's gallery. And you'll see here that the cameras, I took this picture on my Google Pixel 9 camera, and all of these pictures were taken with the camera here in this gallery. So you'll see if I zoom into them pretty well, they look really good. And so at least for someone who uses their phones to take pictures just casually, you'll like the camera. I don't know how it'll be for you if you actually use the camera for professional photography, but for me as an amateur photographer or just someone who casually takes photography, it was fine. And another thing about the phone is perfect for me. The phone works well, I've never dropped a call. And sometimes for my service, in my own particular case, there's some interruptions, but it's not that big of a deal. And on to the next section, I think. I'll cut this later on if this is not the next section. Okay, yeah, I didn't have to cut this, so it's the next section, which is the battery. So I charged this phone on Friday night and I used it yesterday. Or I finished charging it yesterday morning, I think. No, it was today's Sunday. I was at 87 at the end of the day yesterday and I turned it off, and I've used this phone for a little while today, and it's midday around 1300 hours on Sunday. And the battery is still at 82%. And for my usage, that's pretty good on day 2. And let me go into settings really quick. And so you'll see here in settings that it was at the end of Friday, day 3. Yeah, so I'm still going. I didn't use it much yesterday. I was out and I didn't take this phone with me. Yeah, so there's no way of going through my previous 10-day to show you the 4 days that I'm not able to show you the past 10 days, which had a streak of 4 days of not using it, or 4 days of having it on and getting good battery life. But anyways, for me, I'm able to get 2 to 4 days out of this phone. So 2 days on days when I take it out with me for work or for going out with friends and family whenever I need to do that. And I'm able to get good battery life. I'm able to go 1 day, probably about 60 to 75%. At the end of the day, on day 1, And day 2, if I do the same thing, I'll be close to dead, but not very close to dead, maybe above 30%. And I'd sneak my way a little bit into day 3 if I'm lucky. But generally, I can go anywhere between 2 and 4 days with this phone. And the battery is a good indicator. Or let's see, actual battery manager. So these are my settings. Let me see where the battery information is. And so it gives, again, as you see here, it gives an estimation of how long the battery will last, and that is a pretty good estimation. And oh, it's under information, device information. Yeah, I can lump those two into yeah, there we go, battery information. Yeah, so this has only a cycle count of 81, so it's a pretty new phone with a good battery. And you'll see that on November 21st, 2024 is the date that the previous owner first used it. And so it's only about a year old at this point. And you'll see too that the Android version is the most up-to-date version, which is Android 16 at the time of release of this video. And so it's pretty awesome to know that your phone will be updated very, very frequently. And the one thing that I like about these updates are that they're very much automatic, at least the way I have it set up. So I don't have to worry about turning off the phone anytime during the day. And so since I usually turn off the phone at night, an update will be, or updates will be completely installed on the phone overnight after I turn off the phone, and when I turn on the phone the next morning, it'll be the newest security patch or full around monthly or quarterly update, whatever type of update it is. And I think these phones get updates faster or at the same pace as Google phones, so updates will be awesome if you're coming from Google phones to GrapheneOS. So that is a good one for us. And speaking of software, Google Play services, again, as I said, might hinder your ability to use some apps, but I think those apps that really you would really need Google Play services for are serving you ads anyways. So if you're really doing this, you don't want ads and you want to get away from all these mainline Google stuff. So it's better for you not to have them. And so I'd say use this at your own risk of not being able to use the apps that you want, and study what workarounds you may need to get those apps that you use working. And for the next section, I'll be talking about the future of GrapheneOS. So now for the future of GrapheneOS, let me close this out. Okay, now for the future of GrapheneOS, it's a very uncertain future, because if you've been following the Google News lately, you'll find out that in the not too far future, next year in 2026 and in 2027, they'll be rolling out some bad things like sideloading on mainline Google operating systems will be restricted. And one thing that they use to justify that is that more malware is sideloaded on via third-party app stores and just regular standard open Android APKs than so on their Google Play Store. And also, they have recently made some moves to make Android more closed source of an operating system, like not publishing the Google AOSP mainline threads on GitHub. So that may make GrapheneOS more closed source over the foreseeable future, and hopefully they go back on the sideloading thing, because if that's implemented in the mainline, in just the main code for Google Android itself, it'll make what GrapheneOS here is doing more likely impossible to do. So I hope that they optimize for our freedom in using their free and open source software, and I hope that these custom ROMs keep on existing the way that they have for the past many years, as long as Google's Android has been around. And for my next section, I'll be talking about my final rating of GrapheneOS. Comes to my rating of GrapheneOS, this will be a short one, and this rating is a 9 out of 10, and it loses some of its credits because of open source apps not being as feature rich as some of the Google apps that I've been used to, and I depended on before making the switch. But other than that, I'm certain that almost all people will find it useful and a much needed break from Google services and all of the ads once they set it up correctly with services that don't need ads. And next, on to my conclusion. So in conclusion, everybody, I am very satisfied with GrapheneOS over the 6 months that I've used it on my main phone. And other than a couple of stylistic choices and some incompatibility with certain apps out of the box that can be fixed very quickly and very easily, I would rate it very highly, in a rating like 9 out of 10, for instance. And I would very recommend this to you. And it would be recommended for you if you want to change from Google, or you want something to keep yourself more secure from the spies, evil corporations, and unsavory third parties. And I'm also a fan of how calm this is, without having the ability to connect to the ads that other apps will like to put in them. And with that being said, that's about it for me. And in this video, I talked about GrapheneOS, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and if you loved it, or found it useful, or think that anyone else would find this useful, make sure to share it with someone. And with that being said, my time here is done, and this has been Matt, talking to you about GrapheneOS. Until next time, stay safe and be curious. Matt out.